This is Richard Gallager, who is being interviewed in his Voorheesville, New York home, May 3rd, 2005 at 2:15 p.m. He served in the United States Navy from 1955 to 1961. This interview is being conducted by Kenneth and June Hunter. What is your full name, and when and where were you born?
Richard Allen Gallager, and I was born in the old Brady Memorial Hospital in Albany, New York.
And what did you do before you entered the service?
I entered the service 30 days after high school, so through high school I worked for my older brother, who was a builder, and I worked at, it used to be Central Markets down in Westmere before Price Chopper. I worked on a chicken farm, had a paper route. I caddied at the old Albany golf course. I guess I was always doing something before I went in the Navy.
And did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted because back in the 50s they were still had the draft, and I didn't want to go in the Army. And the Navy was an 8-year enlistment. You had to do 4 on active duty and 4 in the reserve. But they had a program if you joined while you were in high school. It was a 6-year term. You only had to do 2 years on active duty. So I joined in '55 in high school and went to reserve meetings once a month until the deal was you had to go on active duty 30 days after high school. So after high school I went on active duty and went on a train from here to Bainbridge, Maryland, and did my boot camp, which I think was at least 16 weeks. You got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. We had a lot of fire schools. They showed you what happens if a gallon of gasoline explodes. We went in buildings with tear gas. You had to learn how to swim. If you didn't, they taught you how to swim real fast. I forget the day-to-day, a lot of drills and exercises and marching. Bainbridge was a pretty big place. There were probably 4,000 or 5,000 people there. The food was excellent, but you stood in line for hours just to eat a meal. I can remember St. Patty's Day we had corned beef and cabbage, and I must have been in a line about a mile long. It took several hours to finally get there, but boot camp was good. It got you in good physical condition. And then after boot camp you got a 30-day leave, and my orders then were to go to the Naval receiving station in Washington, D.C., and all branches of the service were there at that receiving station. It was in Anacostia, I think a suburb of Washington. So I was there. I was a personnelman, and I did office duties there for a year, and then I got orders to report to a destroyer tender out of Newport, Rhode Island, the USS Grand Canyon, and I got aboard there in July, and I think it was only about 4 days on that ship, and then we sailed for the Mediterranean, because at that time they were having something they called a Lebanon crisis. There was a problem over in Lebanon, so we joined the 6th Fleet, and we went from Newport to Ceuta Bay, Crete. And we were there for several months until that problem cleared up, and then we started to head back, stopping at Izmir, Turkey, Athens, Greece, Naples, Italy, Barcelona, Spain. Interesting thing over there in Greece in November in the Aegean Sea, it was warm enough to swim. We could go swimming in the Aegean Sea, And essentially you just jumped off the ship about amidships. That was the lowest, which was still about 6 stories high. And they had big cargo nets. You climbed back up the net and jumped off again. And they also had whaleboats in the water with fellows with M1s watching for sharks, which was kind of nervous thinking about sharks, but you're 17, you're going to live forever. But I remember some unusual jellyfish that I've never seen before or since. Then we stopped at Gibraltar and refueled to head back to the United States. And on the way back we did participate in a lot of Nato exercises. And to see all those ships was very interesting. And when we were in Naples, we were tied up alongside the USS Forrestal, which was the biggest carrier at that time. That was interesting to see that. When we were in Naples, I took a 3-day tour of Rome. So I got to the Vatican, saw the Sistine Chapel, Fountain of Trevi. Barcelona, Spain, I got to see a bullfight. Athens, I remember we toured Athens, Greece. There wasn't much in Suda, Crete, and that got like 120 in the afternoon. We slept up on the main deck. It was too hot to be inside the ship. It was a good experience, and to see those other countries was very interesting. I remember my father was in World War I, and I was always a picky eater, and he said when I went in the Navy that I was going to starve to death because I didn't eat anything, and I couldn't wait to tell him on the way back home. We were in the North Atlantic at Thanksgiving, and we actually had lobsters. We had full, they flew them in, I guess, live lobsters. So I couldn't wait to tell him that, because he had been eating out of a can or whatever you do in the Army. We got back to Newport probably in January, and from there we went to Norfolk, Virginia. We did more NATO exercises. Sometimes the ship would move over to Fall River, Massachusetts, for whatever reason, I'm not sure. But so I spent the second year on that ship, and that was fine, and that was the home of the Second Fleet in Newport, and they had quite a few ships there. But I remember when we left for the Mediterranean, I had never been out of New York State before, and the ship took us around the back of the breakers and some of those real big mansions at Newport. I had no idea what they were at the time, but it was pretty impressive to see the back of them. The ship life, on a daily basis, I worked in the ship's office, taking care of the records, and destroyer tender is basically a huge machine shop. We repaired destroyers. We would have 4 or 5 of them tied up alongside of us whenever we went into port. And I remember in Izmir, Turkey, they're a very proud country, and they have a flag on everything that'll hold a flag. And one day one of the sailors had too much to drink. Somebody off of one of the ships, he took down one of the flags for a souvenir. And the next day the whole Turkish fleet surrounded us in that harbor. We probably had 5 destroyers alongside of us. It was kind of exciting for a minute, but these ships were much smaller and we had really a lot more firepower than they did, so they settled it politically. They put that fellow in prison. The Turks were really upset about having their flag taken down. Other experiences, we had a fellow on our ship that was either sick or hurt, and we had to highline him to another ship, a bigger ship with better facilities, to take care of his problem. That was very interesting. I didn't realize when two big ships come together in the ocean how rough it gets between the two ships. Our ship would probably hold 1,000 men, to give you an idea how big it was. The water just got so rough between it could be perfectly calm, but when the two ships got close enough together to highline somebody, it really got rough in between. You couldn't believe it. A destroyer might have 250 fellows on it, and if we were repairing a destroyer, if we worked on their galley, for instance, we'd feed that whole ship, that complement, on our ship. It was that big. Interesting things out in the North Atlantic was to look off one side and have it be raining really hard, and on the other side of the ship the sun was out and it was very calm. You could almost see that line. We came back across the North Atlantic in November, December, and we had, I don't remember any big storms, but just very rough sea. You had 60-foot ground swells, and the ship would go down into one of those swells and you'd take water over the bow, and when it came back up again, the screw or the propeller would come out of the water and that whole ship would shake. That was an interesting experience. Food was good on the ship, no complaints there. We had an optical shop, you know, where they could engrave things or make, you know, they made me my nameplate for my desk. We had a lot of shops on there. They had the ability to make quite a few things. We had a ship store and a pharmacy, and it was like a small city, pretty self-contained. Over in the Mediterranean, one of my duties, I would go ashore in the morning and pick up the mail and the stars and stripes. And I remember in, I think it was in Turkey, we had about 5 destroyers alongside, and it was way up high on a hill, and all those ships would be facing you. And then a little while later you'd look back and they would be facing in an opposite direction. You know, they're at anchor, and I didn't realize that they're moving. Every time I looked, there'd be a different angle that I was looking at. But overall, it was a good experience. You got to meet a lot of people, a lot of different kinds of people. So, I don't know, it was just humbling to see so many people and their abilities. I think it's a good experience for somebody who, particularly me at that time, I didn't want to go to college. And I think it was a real good education. You got to see, I got to see quite a bit of the Mediterranean and meet a lot of people. So it was a good, you know, a good experience. You weren't sheltered, you know, you got to see a lot of other things. And then on the ship too, I kept money on the books. I didn't really need much money for anything. So when I got discharged, then I had enough money on the books that I could buy a used car and a suit and Lois an engagement ring, and paid cash for all these things. And then further down the road I went to borrow some money and I realized I didn't have any credit. So that was interesting. But I got my first car when I got out of the service.
Thinking back to what life was like aboard ship, people today have no idea. They think everybody had their own stateroom and cabin and so forth.
Yeah.
How cramped was it? What about laundry facilities?
Yeah.
What about washing and water rations?
Yeah, of course, you all shared showers, you know, 8 or 10 fellas at once and taking turns. and we slept up forward in the bow of the ship, up where the anchor locker is when they drop that anchor, and that sounds like a freight train when that goes up and down, but we slept up in the bow. We slept 5 high in what they call racks, and I was on the bottom rack. And I remember when you got in your rack, that's how you stayed all night, because you couldn't roll over. There wasn't enough room to move. The food was good, and sleeping quarters were kind of tight, but you weren't in them that long. We had a library. It was pretty decent. It was interesting to be out on the ocean like that, and to live on a ship. We had days when we were having bad storms. You couldn't go outside. Nobody was allowed outside the ship on the main deck. But every morning, and this is what I made up, was a thing called the plan of the day. Distributed that early each morning, and everybody knew at 8 o'clock this was going to happen, at 9 o'clock that was going to happen. It spelled out the whole day for you. If anybody was coming, at one time we were a flagship, we had an admiral aboard, so that meant a lot more people, and you did things a little differently. But the plan of the day was interesting and told you what uniform to wear and what port you were coming into. That was a good thing. Otherwise, it was just office work and play cards at night or do whatever you wanted and relax. And
did you have time off for relaxation when you were at sea?
Yes, yeah, you had days off, which then you spent in the library, or they had movies, ship's movies. So you did have time off during the week, and then in the ports they had when you could go ashore. That was liberty. You had 48-hour liberty or a 72-hour liberty. You always had to keep about a third of the men on the ship. So everybody had a different. If you had a red Liberty card, you could go ashore for 48 hours. If you had a green one, you could go for 72 hours. So that's how I was able to take tours of Rome and Barcelona. I went to an opera in Barcelona. For a while I was a chaplain's assistant. That's how I got to go to the opera in Barcelona. I think it was Othello. But Barcelona was interesting because of their siesta. At 3 o'clock in the morning, it's rush hour. People are going up and down the street like they would here at 5 o'clock. Barcelona was a nice country, a nice climate. But after that, being on the ship, I really enjoyed it. But of course I had to work. So I always thought when I get out, I'd like to take a cruise. So since I left the Navy, Lois and I have taken a cruise of Hawaii, the Rhine River up through Germany and France, and a lot of cruises in the Mediterranean. I just really enjoy that ship life, I guess.
Did you find things had changed when you went back for a pleasure trip versus in the military?
Well, yeah, we did go back years later to Newport, and I expected to see all the ships there, and of course they weren't. Now it's just a resort. It's all pleasure boats and a big resort area. But boy, before that, you never stand on top of the hill. You never saw so many. It had 2 big piers, and you never saw so many ships. But as a result of that Navy experience, I have taken an awful lot of cruises, and I really enjoy them.
What about the Rhine River or Greece in that area? Had that changed much from just more people?
Oh yeah, I haven't been back to any of those countries.
Oh.
No, the Rhine River cruise we did after the service.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I've never been back to any of the other countries. I've been to all through the whole UK. You know, Wales, England, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland. But never. I haven't been back to the Mediterranean.
Now, on board ship, people think that you have duties like you had, but they are not aware that in the Navy you always had to be prepared for any kind of emergency. What was it like when you first experienced the general quarters drill, and would you explain what the general quarters drill was on board ship?
Yeah, you start learning about that in boot camp. There's a signal, general quarters, and that is an emergency, or man your battle stations, and you constantly had drills. You know where your lifeboat was or your gunnery station whenever they did general quarters, and you lived in fear that you would ever hear that signal. And coming back across the North Atlantic in the middle of the night, they sounded general quarters, and even though I was just a kid, I was scared to death because we were bobbing around like a cork. And the one thing that you fear in the Navy is fire. And the general quarters, of course, we weren't at war or anything, so we had to assume that it was a fire, which it was. And we had a 5-inch gun on the bow, and we had a canvas over it, and somebody on watch had thrown a cigarette, and that got that canvas smoldering, and they sounded the general quarters. And I was never so scared in all my life, and relieved when it turned out not to be anything, but general quarters is really a frightening sound.
There's more to just the alarm sounding. Could you explain about having to tighten down hatches and go through...
to get watertight and dog the hatches.
Doors.
Yeah, we went through all those drills, and we still went to our lifeboats and all. We still really didn't know what was going on, and of course you fear the worst. But yeah, there was a whole procedure, and some people were responsible for, they were on crews to man various fire hoses. We had to shut all the hatches, dog them, and tighten them down, latch them so that the ship was in a series of compartments. If one got flooded, you know, the whole ship wouldn't go down. Yeah, we had to go through all those things. We really weren't sure what was going on.
And were you fortunate enough to not be the farthest away point from your battle station?
Yeah, that was interesting. When I got on the ship in Newport, that ship was so big that I was afraid to go very far from my rack where I slept. I wasn't sure if I'd ever find my way back. It's hard to believe, but the ship was that big and so many levels, and if you're watching a movie at night up on the main deck, and then it got to be dark, and then you had to go back to your rack. It took me a few days before I could really find my way all around the ship. Another thing I remember, I think I still have scars on my legs from the Navy ships have those in each hatch that it must be a foot high that you got to step over. Well, I fell through every one of those for about 2 weeks, and that's something you don't see on the cruise ships. It's like a hotel. You just walk through these doorways and you don't think about it. And things like carpeting, and these ships were just steel, and they were just gray, and they were wet and slippery, and nothing like a cruise ship.
When going on the general quarters drill, how did they maintain a smooth flow of traffic in there? Everybody running up and down the same ladders?
Yeah, well, in some cases it wasn't. You're supposed to use the starboard ladder or the port ladder, depending on your. But that seemed to go very well. I think we were really well trained in boot camp. They really did put a big emphasis on fire, and also the folding your clothes, because you didn't have much room. You had these little lockers, and you had to get all these uniforms and things in there. So I learned how to fold clothes, which was helpful later on too. But I think the training, I think they really impressed us with. They had a small concrete building in Bainbridge at boot camp with a couple of openings in it with a steel flap over them. And they put a gallon of gasoline in there, and we were back a couple of 100 yards, and they had a wire with a torch on it. We'd go down that wire and go in that window where the flap was and ignite those fumes. And that explosion, when you blow those steel flaps up, it was very impressive. So you learn to have a lot of respect for raw gasoline and for fire. We had buildings set up so that you had to go in and they would fire tear gas canisters, and you had to get a mask on and work your way through the building. A lot of fire demonstrations, a lot of general quarters drills. So I mean, they really, they really drove it into you to be careful about fire and things like that. But yeah, general quarters seemed to go all right. They had the stations for the most part, so that you used the starboard ladder, the port side of the ship, to cut down on a lot of the confusion. So that didn't seem to be too bad.
While you're out in the Mediterranean, did you ever have to take part in offloading of ammunition or stores before you could go into a port?
No, we didn't have any, during peacetime, we didn't have any ammunition on the ships. And a lot of ports, too, we were out quite a ways. We had to anchor, and they sent a pilot. In other words, a captain came out on a pilot boat and would bring our ship in closer into a harbor. But very often we anchored outside of a harbor because we had other ships alongside that we worked on. So during peacetime we were pretty much just concerned with repairing ships and not rearming, as opposed to the submarine tenders that repair and rearm ships. But there's no need for us to have any ammunition, I guess, at that time. So no, I didn't have to do any offloading that I recall.
Did you have any collateral duties, such as when they had to refuel at sea, take provisions on at sea while underway?
Well, that was all bosun's mates and deckhands. I didn't, fortunately, get involved in any of that. I know what you mean. I guess we had enough people that, it wasn't necessary for me to.
A bigger
I just could watch.
ship.
Yeah. I'm sure in a smaller ship you had 5 or 6 duties. You had to wear 3 or 4 hats, but we were big enough that everybody was kind of specialized.
Now, can you remember, since you said you'd hardly been out of New York State before you went into the service, what was that day like getting on the ship? Did you get seasick or any of the other people? Or?
No, yeah, we did have people that did get sick. As soon as they said we were going to leave the dock, they got sick. I don't remember Dramamine back then, but the ship was big enough that it really didn't bother me. It goes front to back, but it doesn't roll side to side like a destroyer. But I know even in our galley, we had a lip all around the table to keep your trays from sliding off on the floor. As soon as I saw that lip, I knew we were in trouble. It was there for a reason. But it was really a good-sized ship, and you were aware of the screw coming out of the water and things like that. But a destroyer would be much worse as far as getting sick.
Now, when you had liberty, It's nothing like departing a cruise liner. You could come and go as you felt like. What was it like? Was there a protocol to follow to be able to go on your liberty?
Well, it was that rotation. You know, they always had to keep a third or 2/3 of the complement on the ship, so you didn't always get liberty. It depended a lot on your conduct and what was going on at the time. If you were involved in some activities, even though you were in port, that caused you to be loading or unloading, and you may not get liberty in that particular port, but it was, they tried to be fair and just have the different colored cards and sort of take turns so that people could, you know, be able to get off and see some of these other places.
And did they receive you well in these cities at that time? Happy to see you fellows, or?
Yeah, I think
the safety was fine.
Yeah, you were really. The only place really was Turkey that those folks just, and they had good reason, but you weren't comfortable. When I would go, especially when they took that flag down, I didn't know what happened, and when I went ashore, I was by myself to get the stars and stripes and things like that, and people looking at me like they would rather I wasn't there, and then all the other ships came in, and it was kind of scary to be on the shore by myself. But the people, well, you know, they weren't overly friendly, but on the other hand, they didn't hurt us, you know. And Spain and Italy, there's so many sailors there, servicemen, that nobody even looked at you twice, you know. So many uniforms.
While in the Mediterranean, did you hook up for NATO maneuvers with fleets of other nations?
Yeah, we had some English ships. In one of the exercises, there were 4 or 5 English frigates. And we did a lot of target. In other words, they would pull a plane would pull another, what they call a drone, behind it, be quite maybe half a mile behind it, and everybody was shooting at this. And that noise, you had to have earplugs. That was incredible, how noisy that was. But yeah, the only one NATO exercise did involve other British ships, frigates. Yeah, I don't remember any other, you know, Australian or any other navies involved.
Now, can you recall what a typical payday was like on board ship? How did they handle that?
Yeah, that was interesting. You got paid once a month in cash, and you went down on the mess decks, which was where we ate, a big open area. And there were a couple of officers there, and you stood in line to get your cash payment every month. And when I remember the first time I got up to the table, and they had a 45 right on the table. And I thought, well, that's funny, because we're out in the middle of the ocean, you know, what's anybody going to do, or where are you going to go after you do it? But that always impressed me. I never really saw that many handguns before in my life, but for those guys to have a 45, and they just had it laying right on the table, and they were handing out all this cash. I've asked other fellows who were in the Navy, and a lot of them said they didn't remember that, or they didn't remember seeing that, but that always impressed me, that they would have guns right there. I didn't mind with the whale boats with the M1s watching for sharks while we were swimming, but I never, to see those handguns sitting on the table, it was really interesting.
So then if you got all this money, how could you not have a few people on there rob you? What did you do?
Well, they didn't have to rob you. You could just go lose it in a card game.
Oh,
that's
or the local bar or something.
That's what a lot of fellas did. You know, and when you'd be at sea, you get a month's pay, and then you come later that night, go down in the bowels of the ship somewhere, And you'd see a card game with more money than you ever saw in your life. And a lot of those fellas would lose it in one night, and then they were borrowing for the next 30 days. And I met a friend of mine went to boot camp with. I saw on the plan of the day that this particular day that his ship was going to be alongside us for repairs. So I went over. You got to walk across 4 or 5 other ships, and I finally got there and asked Jerry what he was doing, and he was loaning money. And he was making a fortune, 5 or 7, and somebody borrowed $10. They gave him back 15. He said he had more money and he knew what to do with. And I guess he probably had his own little committee of people who enforce these loans too. But that was interesting. You got to see a lot of things that you never would have otherwise, or never would have dreamed of. It was just interesting. But unfortunately, all of a sudden, that was a long time ago. I'm trying to remember back 48 years maybe.
Same way they always said how the sailors always had to get tattoos, and of course that's becoming the fashion today.
Yes, yeah.
What was do you know, did a lot of the people do that back then?
Yeah, a lot of fellas did, because a lot of those ports had tattoo artists, and I was always afraid that I'd get carried away and get a tattoo, but unfortunately I never did. I was able to resist that for whatever reason. But yeah, I noticed today so many people have tattoos, and it's just what I don't understand is people get tattoos where they can't see them. I remember, should I say this, or
go ahead.
In church one morning there was a young gal ahead of us in the pew, and we were sitting behind her, and she dropped her program, and when she bent forward you could see a tattoo, and I said right out loud, "Oh my gosh," and she laughed. I mean, I was just so startled.
That's why they hate to see winter coming. They have to cover everything up.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know why.
Or freeze.
Yeah, if I got a tattoo, I guess I want to look at the darn thing every day. I'd be proud of it. But they get them where they can't see them, so I don't know what that's all about. But no, I was able to resist that. I was able to get some nice small plates in Greece that I still have. I broke one on the way home, but I still have a couple of really nice small Greek plates. I had gotten some nice souvenirs in some of those countries that I was able to bring back with me. I forget what else.
So that
go ahead. Now, aboard ship, did you have to take care of washing your own clothes? How did they handle that? What about pressing uniforms and getting ready for inspections? Yeah,
there was a ship's laundry, so we didn't have to wash our own clothes. There was a ship's laundry, but any big inspections, I could always find a guy who knew how to iron and could do those things, and I would pay him to iron our jumpers and things like that. I could shine shoes and all, but I was never big on ironing things. I remember in boot camp we had a fellow from Long Island, and everybody in their locker, you had it was like a ketchup bottle with water in it, with a little spout on top to sprinkle to iron. So Jerry, he slept in the rack under me, and I remember one night I could smell this terrific smell of licorice, and I couldn't imagine where it was coming from, and I asked Jerry, and he said, "My ketchup bottle is not full of water, it's full of anisette. My girlfriend makes anisette, and I put it in this clear bottle, this like ketchup bottle." But boy, when he would take a drink of it at night, you could smell licorice all through the barracks. It was a funny kind of thing.
And I suppose, was it illegal technically?
Oh sure, oh my gosh, yes. Yeah,
but no one would ever say anything, of course.
Well, there was never, that's right, you
stuck up for each other.
Yeah, and that was another thing too, is you had to watch how you conducted yourself, because there's always somebody bigger and stronger, and so you had to be careful of how you handled yourself. But no, we tried to, for the most part, I think we worked things out among ourselves. Last thing we'd ever do would be get some officer involved and then get something on your record. So That was a good education, to learn how to handle things and how to conduct yourself so that you didn't get in trouble.
When you went into a port, were there ever times when you had to stay on shore patrol, the Army, the equivalent of the Army's military police, and to make sure that the ship's personnel got back to the pickup point in plenty of time?
No, yeah, we had the shore patrol. I was never involved in that. I don't know how they, first of all, I think they selected the biggest people they could possibly find to be on shore patrol, because you got into a lot of riots and some of the bars over there. Same with Newport, Rhode Island. Even in Newport, when I first got on the ship there, we had a big rec hall up at the top of the hill. And I can remember one night somebody started a big fight, and these shore patrol, the biggest people I ever saw in my life with helmets on and clubs, came in and started clubbing everybody and throwing them in a big pile. And everybody you had the name of your ship on your sleeve. So they would just sort them out. Everybody for the Grand Canyon, they put in a pile over here, and for this ship, and then they brought you down in a paddy wagon and carried you back on the ship. But yeah, shore patrol, some places it's kind of a special. I know in the Army and the military police, if you get into military police, you're really not assigned to any specific unit or outfit. You go wherever you're needed. Back then, the military police, during wartime, when the Army took over a particular village or city, then the military police came in behind to kind of mop things up and sort things out. But yeah, we had a shore patrol unit on the ship, but I never had to get involved with that.
When you had Liberty in Gibraltar, can you describe what Gibraltar was like? Did you have an opportunity to tour the rock itself?
No, when we were in Gibraltar, it wasn't very long. We just refueled, and I was on a radar watch. And in Gibraltar, the activity, the shipping going in and out of the past Gibraltar, there were so many things on the screen that you just had to watch every second. And you were in real close proximity to some other really big ships. So but my only experience with Gibraltar was just to see it off the side of the ship. And then I happened to catch a radar watch the day that we refueled and headed home. So I really didn't get to see it or walk on it or anything.
So then you mentioned quite different people you served with. Do you keep in touch with any of those people today? Have you ever been to any of your ship reunions or anything?
No, and we do have them, and they're always, the last one was down in Florida in July, and but they're always in Arizona, or, so there hasn't been anything really close enough to me, but I still know a lot of the fellas, and we keep in touch, and I get a thing every year where the reunion is going to be and when, and I just haven't made one yet. And then, of course, as time goes on, you get further and further away from that. It's another part of your life, and at first you're all excited and do reunions, but that just kind of fades after a while, I guess.
So then when you left the service, what did you do, and where were you discharged from?
I got off the ship in Newport, Rhode Island, hitchhiked back to Albany, got here, it was in July. I got here on Friday, and I went to work for my oldest brother Monday morning, who was a builder, and I worked with him for 3 or 4 years. And then I went to work for other contractors, and then eventually on my own. Yeah, brother's a great builder and all, but we just couldn't get along, you know. He's a master craftsman. The guy is really terrific, but I don't think I worked for him more than a week, and I knew more than he did already, so we started to have problems, and It's interesting today. He's 8 years older than I am, and he still does some work, and he'll call me up and ask my advice about something. And he was always my mentor. I mean, he just, when it came to carpentry, he was just gifted. But he's slowing down and things are changing. There's new products that he doesn't know about, and so I'm able to help him. And but it worked out good. That you know, I never did get to college. I went to Siena Nights, took business law, took accounting, took a lot of courses at night, but never really followed through to get a degree. But I do have a trade, so you know, we've been able to do all right. But I think if I had it to do over again, I'd certainly go to college and get an education, a better education.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you first went into the service, you had the choice. You could have gone into the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, the Coast Guard. Why did you settle on the Navy?
Because my oldest brother, the builder, was in the Navy. He was on Guam for a couple of years. My other brother was in the Army, and they both said to me, look, at food is better in the Navy, the duty's better in the Navy. So we agreed that I would go in the Navy. I was going to say something else about that too, but they both, you know, here I had one in the Army, one in the Navy, and they both agreed that the Navy I'd really be better off there. Oh, when I was in Newport, that first year on the ship, I had a chance based on, I was taking tests all the time to get a move up my rate, you know, from seaman to petty officer, and based on the test scores, they had in Newport at that time a U.S. Navy School of Military Justice. And if I wanted to extend my enlistment another year or two, I could have gone to that school, that military justice school, and I elected not to do that. Here again, I wish I had. But
now you say you hitchhiked home. They didn't provide you funds to come home.
No, I hitchhiked over the Mass Pike with my sea bag. That's how I broke that one dish I got all the way from Greece. I broke that on the Mass Pike on the way home. Now they didn't give you. Oh, maybe if they did give you a mustering out pay or something, I don't know. But I left a ton of money on the books, and I guess they just gave me a check for that. So I was used to hitchhiking back and forth to Newport, so I didn't think anything of it. I just hitchhiked after I got discharged. But I know sometimes we would get rides with some fellows here that lived in Albany, and you'd leave on a Sunday night and you'd go to Newport and you'd find out the ship had moved to Fall River, Massachusetts over the weekend. I probably should have known it, but so now you're trying to find where Fall River is in the middle of the night. So that was always fun, but it wasn't a bad trip just from here to Newport. You know, thank God we weren't stationed in Norfolk, Virginia or something. Oh yeah, that was in Washington in the receiving station. We'd come home a lot of times for weekends, and that was before they had the Baltimore Tunnel. You drove right through downtown Baltimore at 5 o'clock at night. That was a terrible trip.
Did you ever take the ferry across, say from below Norfolk at Little Creek, to go across and catch the train heading north?
No. The ship went down at Norfolk, Virginia a couple of times. I think we had different maneuvers and things that we would tie up there for, maybe a day or two. A lot of times too, I think they just wanted to go out past the 3-mile limit so they could open the ship's store and sell things without taxes. So I think those were more trips just to open up the ship's store over the 3-mile limit and avoid taxes.
Were there any opportunities in your off-duty hours where they had something that was a miniature equivalent of, say, today's McDonald's, where you could purchase, say, a hamburger or a milkshake or so? sometimes on some of the bigger ships they had that opportunity right after movies or before movies.
Yeah, I don't remember anything remotely like a fast food thing. Not even close.
Hmm.
No.
So then, are you active in any of the military organizations or anything?
Yeah, 5 years ago I joined the American Legion here in Voorheesville, post 1493, and they have a dart league among other things. Every Wednesday night we have 6 teams. We shoot darts. They got a shuffleboard league and all kinds of activities going on down there. It's nice to see the guys and get together. And with our dart league, we have steak roast every June, which is nice. Steaks and clams, and of course you're involved with the parade. That's a big part of it. But it's went to the roast beef dinner Saturday night and go to the breakfast, and just a good place to get to meet meet with the other fellas, and talk about swap sea stories. And
tell what your Legion does for the village after the Memorial Day parade. Tell a little bit about the parade. I think it's
we usually
different from many towns.
Yeah, we usually have like Mike Breslin and the local ministers, officials. Politicians. Yeah,
Congressman McNulty.
Yeah, and who's the other guy that I really like?
On the state level?
Yeah, this starts with an M.
It's
just historian.
He's the historian.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
I know who you
I love
mean.
that guy.
McEnany,
I love that
Jack
guy.
McEnany,
Yeah. Well, I saw Mike Breslin Sunday after church. We did the crop walk. I got to talk to Mike Breslin. I see him here in the village. But yeah, we have all the floats. Lois's Garden Club's going to march in it again this year.
Well, what I always think of the village parade, since we live here, is sometimes there were more people in the parade than watching the parade.
That's right, yeah.
And then when the parade is over, the American Legion serves hot dogs, beer and soda for everyone. And you have the races.
Yeah, that's right, the races. What I like is
Community Day.
Yeah, is the fact that the parade goes around the park, so you can stand in front of the church and watch it, and then run across the park, and it's another parade again. Right. You get to see 2 parades. Yeah,
it goes down the street and loops around and comes back again.
That's right, yeah.
And the front meets the back now.
Oh, yeah, that's right, that's right.
We have the fire trucks and the emergency corps.
Yeah.
The 4-H clubs and
scouts and brownies.
And all the little leagues. And
yeah.
I wonder, do you know how many years the American Legion has been sponsoring that parade?
Oh, I don't. I can find out real quick. As long as I can remember.
Yeah. Well, we've lived here many years, and it's always been here.
Now, looking back on it, for today's young man, would you recommend that they look into a career in the service?
I said to my daughter a couple of weeks ago, I have a 16-year-old grandson who's a sophomore in high school, and I said, would he entertain looking into the Air Force and getting an education, courtesy of the government? And she just said, oh, no, he wouldn't. Now, I took him, when he was a little guy, about 12 or 13, I took him down on Slater, and even that would turn me off. If I had seen the Slater before I went in the Navy, I would never have done that.
Now, for those who don't know, the Slater was a little destroyer escort.
Destroyer escort.
It was a smaller, just a little bit bigger than a rowboat.
That's right.
About 30 or 40 people.
Yeah, those things can go up a good-sized river. But they made 600 of them during the war to escort convoys over to England, over to Europe. And that's, as far as I know, the only one that's still... They had sold it, the Greek Navy bought it a while back. and they stripped a lot of things out of it, and then we ended up buying it back from them, towed it back over here, and they're restoring it. But I took him on the Slater, and then I took him down to West Point. We did the West Point tour, and his parents took him. They have relatives out in Colorado, so they took him to the Air Force Academy just before 9/11, before they stopped the tours. He was very impressed with the Air Force Academy. But yeah, it occurred to me when the price of college and all, why not look into it? If I had a son of my own, I would have him look into the military. I mean, when you say military now, everybody says, oh, Iraq and we're going to get killed, but you know, that isn't any reason to, you know, you take whatever comes along. I mean,
The patriotism isn't as strong.
no, apparently not. I just saw a thing in the paper this morning. Now they're going to look into military recruiters going on college campuses. Apparently they're trying to stop them from doing that, but they're going to take another look at it. But I have no problem with the military. It was a good experience. I'm glad I did it.
Okay, well, we thank you very much for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you. Yes.